This is a public broadcast announcement. The following programme contains maiming, murder, mutilation and cannibalism. Recommended viewing age 8 to 12 years old. Viewer discretion is advised. Please enjoy the programme.
Whenever I stroke its soft, silky fur, I shall remember the killing we've done together.
Don't drink it! Unless, of course, you're partial to a little extra body in your tipple.
I am a jolly gardener with fingers nice and red. From all the blood what's on my hands from conquering Kid, he's dead.
This is a show I watched as a child. This was actually one of the options in my Halloween poll, but it lost out by a fairly large margin. But I watched quite a few old spooky shows that I used to watch as a child in preparation for options for the poll, and this one just wouldn't get out of my head. So I just had to share it with you because as someone who was raised on both American and British TV with a 60-40 split in favour of British, I have to say, oh boy are your shows tame in comparison. Even the ones that really cleverly work in adult themes have to do it really subtly so as not to catch the attention of the censors. We do have censors in this country, but when it comes to kids programming, their priorities are...
But you are most welcome to come inside to be looking for him. And that night, the Thorsvelks had a barbecue!
Elsewhere, I suspect. You'll see what I mean in a minute as I introduce you to...
Grizzly Tales for Gruesome Kids!
Now, if this had won in the poll, I was going to go through quite a few British kids shows in addition to this one, like Ghost Hunter, Scream Street, and Horrible Histories. The former two are pretty tame, the latter is...
This may well be followed by some light showers of human heads.
And the guts say... My pudding is going to be so scrummy you won't literally believe it.
So, Walter, are you well?
Messinus was a wise and a noble man who only ever beat his slaves when it was absolutely necessary.
Not. But it didn't win, so I'm just going to be focusing on this one because, ironically, it is infinitely more disturbing than I remember it being as a child. Every episode would start with a stop-motion segment right after we are treated to this show's awesome opening theme. And we are introduced to the creepy caretaker of the Squeam Screen Cinema, who would tell us a little bit about what today's story was going to be while performing all manner of abuse on his pet spider Spindleshanks, which is the best name for a spider ever. He would then start the story, which was in 2D animation, entirely narrated by him like a bedtime story. And I have to say, this guy who plays the curator Nigel Planner is amazing. He's the only actor in the show. He not only does the narration, but all the voices too, and he manages to create very distinct voices for each character.
But I'm your sister.
Not anymore! Cackled the cold-hearted girl with a bunny in the fridge.
Every episode would have a moral lesson for children. You know, the usual stuff. Don't be rude, don't tell lies, don't be cheeky, eat your dinner. That kind of thing. But good grief, the punishments these children would get if they did not do these things. You want to know what this boy's punishment is for not eating his vegetables?
And a slip-slop sliver of a slice-up.
A particularly horrific one is called The Chipper Chums Go Scrumping, which is an unashamed parody of the famous Five, where a group of kids steal apples from a farmer and get compressed into cider. But I think it's so horrific because, stealing aside, these kids don't actually seem like bad kids. In fact, they are comically pleasant.
Sorry, old thing. I feel a proper bounder. I say, chums, I'm parched. Shall we start with ginger beer? What a wizard wheeze! Alice, I'm most awfully sorry, old girl. What a cad I am.
They also quite sincerely beg for their lives at one point.
Alice is only a baby. Please let us go.
Every other child in this show is obnoxious, and you feel an overwhelming sense of relief when karma comes for them in the form of some vengeful supernatural entity who has a pet peeve with whatever unpleasant trait they happen to have. I'm going to go through a few select episodes to give you an overall idea of what the show was like. The first one is called Her Majesty's Moly. This is one of the more bonkers episodes, but you take any scene from this show out of context and it's bonkers.
If you should ever be lurking outside the Queen's bathroom and hear shaving from within, begone, foul moleskin. Now you'll know why.
This is about a little girl who often went to hunt moles with her father.
It's too violent for a little girl like you, Matty. Have a rocket instead.
It's also quite sad that he is actually one of the better parents of the series. But yes, we'll be getting to the parents. And they have some jolly old father-daughter killing time. Which leads to one of my favourite lines in the show.
I shall remember the killing we've done together.
The comeuppance comes in the form of the still-living mole who
had limped to the hole of a mole doctor. Doctor as in witch, not medicine.
The father dies and the queen, yes, the queen, steals the keychain.
What will I sniff when I suck my thumb now?
The girl steals it back and goes to prison for 3 years and grows mole fur. Now, the only reason I included this episode, other than all the funny lines it has,
one is familiar with the lovely smell and feel of mole skin. I can't live without it, your madness.
Is because it's one of the more bonkers episodes. But it is, by a large margin, one of the less gruesome ones. Growing mole hair pales in comparison to the fates of some of these children. The most gruesome examples that come to mind are the barber of Civil, who straps cheeky children into a dentist chair and cuts out their tongues, or Mr. Peeler's Butterflies, where a child who wouldn't go to sleep has his eyelids removed with a tin opener and turned into butterflies. There's also one that has just simple, good old-fashioned gruesomeness as a boy steals from a family of butchers and predictably ends up on their chopping block. You know, I was having a conversation with my brother about this show and he swears up and down that he remembers an episode where a vain boy has his skin stolen by an old man, the old man wears his skin, and the boy has to go about in the old man's skin for the rest of his life. I looked for that one and couldn't quite find it, but it does ring a very tinny, shiver-inducing bell in the back of my mind. Now, there were actually quite a few episodes where the children weren't naughty, and the show decided to just tell straightforward ghost stories. And surprisingly enough, these were the ones that unnerved me the most, at least on rewatch. Nothing particularly horrific would happen in these episodes, and it's even pretty obvious how the story is going to end and how the ghost is going to be revealed, but the way the stories unfold and Nigel Planner's brilliant narration gives these ones so much atmosphere. The ones that come to mind that fall into this category are Grandmother's Footsteps and The Locked Door. The former is a tale where a grandmother tells her scared grandson a ghost story, and you already know the end, and the show knows you know.
Did you guess who the ghost was? Not very hard, was it?
But again, the story is told slowly, creepily, and the boy keeps asking when the ghost is going to turn up. Also, Grandma just casually removes her eye at one point, because why not? The locked door is perhaps even more effective, with this door in this house never having been opened, but a little girl just being drawn towards it night after night. Most episodes in the early seasons of this show, but these kinds in particular just show off how good the show was at not just showcasing maiming and madness, but also excellent storytelling craft as the tension and atmosphere builds and builds throughout the episode. A lot of the time in the punishment-centric episodes, i.e. most of them, You would be going through the story and every now and then it would cut to a quick flash of the villain just doing what it is they do, letting the audience know they were out there watching. Though when this happens, we rarely see them until they're ready to strike. So even if nothing grisly happens, the tales are still pretty scary for kids. I don't ever remember being scared of this show in the don't turn the lights off sense, but it definitely did unnerve me. Despite how gloriously horrific it is quite a funny show in that very British way. For example, in an episode called The New Nanny, do you know what the parents are called?
Mr. Frightfully Busy, while Mrs. Frightfully Busy.
And yes, he says it that way every single time.
Mrs. Frightfully Busy.
How do? My name is Mrs. Frightfully Busy. And do you know what the kids' names are?
Tristram and Candy.
This one clearly doesn't have a high opinion of people who can't be bothered to raise their own children. Going back to the parents in this show, they range from incompetent to god-awful, as when the consequences befall the children, they either don't notice or don't care. For example, in this episode, where a clumsy girl is turned into ceramic and never moves again for fear of breaking herself, her parents are perfectly content with the situation. Or in this episode, where a boy who refuses to eat his dinner is turned into pasta and
Mrs. King was rather pleased, and Mr. King hadn't noticed that Timothy was missing, so Mrs. King never told him.
Not to mention this. This is the best one.
Mrs. Mac beat us today.
Oh, really?
She beat us with your golf clubs, Daddy.
What?
It can also be pretty mean-spirited, but in that Rowan Atkinson Blackadder way, where the insults are just too entertaining.
There is a family living in South London that has the collective intelligence of a dead ant. Serena Slurp, a great big tub of a girl with mean little eyes.
So yeah, those episodes that I brought up I would say are the highlight of the show, and the best ones to check out if you want to see if you'll like it, or want to scare your kids into doing something. The soundtrack is amazing. The background music adds so much atmosphere. The animation, though cheap and choppy, actually works in the show's favour as it adds to the uncanny unpleasantness of it all. But the highlight is Uncle Grizzly and Nigel Planner's amazing narration. This show, though very well written and creative, wouldn't be nearly as effective without his voice. Oh, and the stop motion segments are also pretty great, as Uncle Grizzly makes his disdain for children abundantly clear.
All children are little liars, and any child who says he isn't is the biggest liar of them all.
And will just randomly do things like this. In the later seasons of the show, the song was changed. It wasn't bad, it just lacked the same punch and grandiose nature of the first one. The stop motion segments were also cut for what I assume are budget reasons, and later they tried to revive the show, but yeah, we just won't talk about that. Yeah, if you decide to check out the show and the animation looks like this, yeah, don't even bother. The closest American equivalent to this I can think of would probably be Goosebumps, which I didn't watch as a child, but I hear was pretty great. Anyone who watched scary or macabre American kids shows, please tell me if I'm being unfair when I say that despite falling in love with some amazing, well-written, intelligent kids shows from American TV, they always seemed a little tame to me. One that did get pretty close to scaring me was Courage the Cowardly Dog, but that was more spooky, abstract imagery than maiming and murdering. And that is not a point against that show, by the way. It just fascinates me as to how much shows like this and horrible histories are able to get away with. So check out a couple of Grizzly Tales episodes. Most of them are on YouTube and they're only 10 minutes a piece. It won't take you long. And do please let me know if I'm being unfair when I say that American kids shows are significantly tamer in comparison. Or did I just get screwed out of all the good stuff? So yeah, this show was violent up to the point where they weren't afraid of showing people getting maimed or killed in the most horrible of ways. They even showed blood on occasion, and I respect it so much for that. I can safely tell you that children were not traumatized by this show, and I think it is important to show them this kind of macabre art. And even though it wasn't something that stuck in my head throughout the years, anyone I have talked to about this show says, "Yeah, I remember that show, it was pretty good, wasn't it?" No, it did not give me nightmares. And if I ever have kids one day, you had better believe they're going to be watching it. In the meantime, I will just leave you with Uncle Grizzly's spine-chilling laugh.